Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. This is the month of May. We're still in Mental Health Awareness Month. Today, I want to discuss um, the tragedy of uh, the suicide of our first Secretary of Defense, James Vincent Forrestal, who might have been channeling a Greek tragedy. That's uh, the Greek tragedy of uh, Sophocles, in his play, uh, his tragedy, that's what they're called, of Ajax. I'm going to discuss the play in just a minute. But on May 22nd, 1949, James Vincent Forrestal, who had been admitted into the psychiatric unit of National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, would apparently plunge to his death from the 16th floor of his room, where his room was. He was dressed in just the bottom half of his pajamas. Now, an apparent suicide note was found, and uh, it was a translation of Sophocles' tragedy Ajax. And I'm going to just uh, narrate briefly, provide a quick summary of the tragedy Ajax. But before I do that, let me state what was going on in James Forrestal's life. So James Forrestal was a very accomplished man, even though in terms of his personality was described as being pugnacious and insecure, very quiet, apolitical, but in other aspects, he was very successful. He was described as a workaholic, an excellent administrator. Again, he was our first Secretary of Defense after it had been reorganized in 1947. Uh, you know, he had previously been Secretary of the Navy when it was a cabinet level position. But with the reorganization under the National Security Act of 1947, the Department of the Navy was subsumed under the Department of Defense, and the U.S. Air Force was also established as a standalone department, out and taken out of the U.S. Army. James Forrestal was a very successful man. He had attended Dartmouth and Princeton. He left Princeton in his last semester, his last year before graduating. But he was nevertheless voted by his senior class as the most likely to succeed. He was editor of the Daily Princetonian. That's the Princeton official school magazine. And after, he worked briefly as a naval auditor, right? So he served in the U.S. as a naval aviator, not as a naval auditor, as a naval aviator, right? An aviator in the Navy during the war. So um, he went to work on Wall Street as a bond salesman, and he made his fortune, eventually becoming president of the Wall Street investment firm that he worked for. And he made a fortune. He was a very wealthy man. But he decided to, take off live his investment, Wall Street financier luxuries and a huge pay, and traded in for public service to serve the government. Now, I'm just going to give a quick parallel of what he would have been living behind. I'm not sure. I don't have details of how much he was making as a Wall Street financier, but he was a millionaire. He had made a fortune. He'd made his fortune on Wall Street, but he decided to go into government service, to become a public servant. Now, when another Secretary of Defense. He's very more famous. That's Robert McNamara because he transformed the Department of Defense, and he's the longest serving Secretary of Defense we've ever had. Robert McNamara had left his position as president of the Motor Company, where he was making $3 million a year in salary, to be Secretary of Defense in the Kennedy administration, right? And where he received just $25,000 a year, right? 25,000. So he traded his $3 million salary a year as president of Ford for $25,000 a year as Secretary of Defense. Of course, Robert McNamara was very accomplished. He had an MBA from Harvard Business School. By the way, he was an accountant. He had been an accountant at PricewaterhouseCoopers. He became the youngest, uh, uh, you know, assistant professor and highest paid at Harvard Business School, because he was actually a professor at Harvard Business School. So he was a very accomplished man. It was the era when they called them he and a bunch, they call them the whiz kids because he analyzed everything. So he'd been an accountant, he transformed the Department of Defense, but he gave up $3 million a year in the private sector to receive $25,000 a year. So importantly, people who made the transition from business to public servant, they make excellent administrators. I was listening to a podcast today where some accomplished guru guy, business guy, was saying military people who make the transition from public service, military, to the private sector, they don't succeed. They don't make good business people. They're not good business people because they're trained in a certain way to follow orders, to take rules, and they're not. Business people are risk takers. They're adaptable. They're flexible. And this guy was saying that, well, that the way people are trained in the military, it doesn't make them successful as businessmen. But interestingly, we've had business people who went uh, you know into the military, who went to become administrators in the Department of Defense, for instance, in the case of Robert McNamara and James Forrestal, who were immensely successful. But back to Robert McNamara's story. So Robert McNamara was Secretary of Defense under Harry S. Truman. Now, it is said that he became depressed. He went to his state of depression because he had um, secretly agreed to support Thomas Dewey, who was a presidential contender. He was the opponent of in the presidential elections, against Harry Truman, right? He was his opponent in the presidential elections, and he had agreed that he was going to serve in Thomas Dewey's cabinet. It somehow Harry Truman won, and when Harry Truman learned of it, fired he fired James Forrestal on March 31, 1949. They said he felt humiliated, he went into depression, and of course, he now admitted himself to receive psychiatric treatment, and eventually, he committed suicide, right, and left a passage of translation of the Greek tragedy by Sophocles, Ajax. So that's supposed to be, so in a way, the shame, right, the dishonor, this is something that features in the tragedy written by Sophocles. So let me give the quick story of Ajax. So interestingly, though, Sophocles wrote this play for a stage, right? He wrote it for a stage to be performed on a stage. And Sophocles had been a general himself. He wrote it in the 5th century BC, around between 441 442 BC. And this is how it goes. So Ajax was a Greek war hero. and he was second only to Achilles. Achilles had been killed. Now he was angered, right? He was angered and envious because Odysseus, right? Odysseus from the Odyssey by Homer. Odysseus was another Greek hero. Odysseus had won the armor of Achilles. This infuriated Ajax because Ajax thought he deserved it. He should have had the armor. So Ajax would then plan. He had a plot in which he schemed to kill Odysseus and other Greek leaders, including Agamemnon, Agamemnon and Menelaus. However, the Greek goddess Athena, right? Athena would intervene. Athena was constantly, she's supposed to be a Greek goddess of wisdom and I think of war, but in Homer, you see her intervening on behalf um, of Odysseus, right? Odysseus is also called Odysseus of the nimble wits. So Odysseus is a very clever, very crafty person, right? And so this was at a time the Greeks, right? The Greek city states, they were allied, trying to invade Troy. They were in the battle against Troy, right? The Trojans. And it was Odysseus who actually came up with the idea of using the Trojan horse, that they should hide within the horse and invade Troy, right? Um, but in any way, Achilles was dead, and so Odysseus won his armor. It made um, it made Ajax, who felt he deserved it. It made Ajax angry, and so what happened was um, Athena intervened and made Ajax mad. Ajax had planned to sneak into their camp, their tents, and to murder them. But Athena made Ajax mad, and so he was delusional. So he went to war and was slaughtering the livestock, the animals. Right, he was slaughtering them, and all the while he thought, well, that by the way, this again was performed on a stage. That's how Sophocles designed it to be performed on a stage. So there's a chorus, there's a lot of noise on the stage. The chorus are actually Ajax's men, his supporters are screaming. And Ajax's mistress, her name was Tecmessa. She witnessed him. She witnessed him going crazy, slaughtering the animals, and he's torturing them. He thinks he's actually slaughtering Odysseus and Agamemnon and Menelaus. He thinks he's slaughtering them and he's torturing them. But he's gone crazy. He's mad. He's delusional. But it's Athena, the goddess that had made him delusional. So he'd gone mad. So eventually, though, he wakes up from his madness, and they tell, Tecmessa, who'd witnessed what happened, told him what had happened, and so he becomes humiliated. He's ashamed, and then he plans on killing himself. He wants that. Okay, the only way he could have his honor restored is for him to commit suicide. But uh, Tech Messer appeals to him that he shouldn't kill himself, so they can live together and raise their son. Yeah, they have a son, Ulysses, right? And so he would then that's Ajax. He would now give a deceptive speech. He would be deceptive. He gave a speech that deceived them, making them believe that, well, the audience believes that, okay, he's changed his mind and he's going to just he's not gonna, he's just gonna live with the humiliation, but he will live and not kill himself. So this is what everybody thinks until he commits suicide on stage. He commits suicide, and so uh, when he commits suicide, however, there was now the issue of his burial, right? So uh, there was now a conflict as Agamemnon and uh, Menelaus, right? Menelaus was the Greek of Sparta, and they were allies. They didn't think he deserved a burial because he had done something shameful. They didn't think Ajax deserved a burial. So there was now the conflict. So Ajax had a half brother, Tusa. Tusa wants to bury him, and the wife, Tecmessa, also wants to give him an honorable burial. But Agamemnon and Menelaus are resisting, saying no, that he doesn't deserve a an honorable burial. But Odysseus intervenes, and Odysseus says, he appeals to Agamemnon, and he prevails, through his strong arguments. Odysseus is supposed to be a very reasonable, wise person, and he appeals to them that they should, be magnanimous, that after all, he's a hero, and that Ajax deserves a hero's burial because he had come as a free man, right, to come and support the Greek kings, that's Agamemnon and Menelaus, to fight. But it's unfortunate what he had done. He had this fall, this moral lapse out of envy. So eventually, Odysseus prevails, and Teucer, they hurries up, and he has him buried. So that's the tragedy of Ajax. Now it's interesting that James Forrestal was supposed to have left a suicide note with a passage quoting the translation of this story of Ajax, right? One way he was probably channeling this was because of the disgrace, right? He was someone who was the Secretary of Defense, but he'd done something shameful, right? And they said in his part of his personality, that's James Forrestal's personality, was that he was very philosophical. He was a quiet person, and obviously he graduated from Princeton. He would have known the classics, and so he probably um, was channeling. He wanted to do a parallel, right? He saw his situation to be similar that of um, to that of Ajax, right? Ajax had done something shameful in trying to kill his allies. Well, what was shameful in terms of um, James Forrestal's actions? Well, possibly the fact that he had sold, he had betrayed his principal. That's the president who, was his leader, by secretly aligning with Thomas Dewey. But Dewey lost, and his deception was discovered, and of course he was fired. And he thinks the only way he can have honor is to commit suicide. That's one way to see it. The other way is to say, well, it was staged. Remember, the story of the play by Sophocles was actually intended for a stage. This was back in the 5th century BC, and to be performed in front of an audience. And then there was a subterfuge, the deception in Ajax's speech. He deceives the audience when he gives a speech like, okay, he's changing his mind, he's not going to commit suicide, only to end up committing suicide. Now, the play by the tragedy written by Sophocles is also remarkable for a lot of its double meanings, right? A lot of its double meanings. And so, another way that one might be able to see the channeling of the tragedy of Ajax in the apparent suicide of James Forrestal could be that, well, it was staged. Maybe he was killed and somebody staged it to make it look like a suicide, just as the tragedy, the play by Sophocles was staged, right? It was created for a stage, for an audience, and there was a lot of double meanings. Like, things weren't exactly how they were presented. There was a lot of presentations. There were speeches that were intended to be misleading, right? Like Ajax's speech, right? His final speech. It was intended to mislead the audience, and so maybe the apparent suicide by um, James Forrestal was not really a suicide. Maybe he had been killed. I don't know. But these are just ways that I'm trying to draw parallels with the remarkable Greek tragedy and the fact that, well, he left a suicide note that had a passage translation of the Greek tragedy of Sophocles, Ajax, which had a lot of double meanings. So that's that. I'm going to do another video, and I'm going to discuss the channeling of this tragedy in the Operation Ajax, which was the first staged operation led by the CIA, which led to the overthrow of the Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.